Hello everyone, this is Elias from Customs for the Kid, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make your very own 3 3/4 inch Star Wars Rebels Gregor custom action figure. And what I'm going to be making this with is the Star Wars Rebels 3 3/4 inch Captain Rex, which I have here on the card, and we're going to be modifying it to turn it into your very own Gregor. So stick around and watch me describe the whole process, and by the end of the video, you'll be able to make your very own Gregor custom action figure. So let's get right to it. So the first thing you're going to want to do before you start any kind of work is do some online research. I want to say a big thank you to my dad this morning. He went online and found this great picture of Gregor. It's an asset. It's got all the angles, and you're just going to want to find pictures that you can refer to while you're because while you're working, you're always going to want to have them. So your final product looks like what you see on screen. And, you know, I think the best base for this figure would be a Captain Rex action figure. It's really the closest thing there is. Obviously, we're going to modify it a lot today. And we're going to have to get rid of the armor and fix the gauntlet. So his gauntlet is a clone commando gauntlet and not the standard clone trooper gauntlet. So I dug up this old boss action figure, and what I'm going to do is make a mold of this arm and run it in resin so we have the correct sculpt for his gauntlet. And then for his other arm, it's going to be bare skin. And to save myself some time, I dug out this old Yarna Del Gargan action figure, and I'm going to remove this arm and place it here, and then I'll paint it and sculpt a little bit so it all blends together nicely. So what we're going to be doing next is making a mold of this arm right here, and what I'm going to be using is Smooth On, and I think this mixture is called Mold Max 14 NV. The ratio is supposed to be 10:1, so, and that's going to be measured by weight. So I have this little scale here where I'm going to be measuring each liquid and then mixing them together in one of these cups and then pouring it into another cup where this arm is going to be molded. While you're working with these, you're going to be wanting to wear gloves because the chemicals are like toxic, and I'm pretty sure they're carcinogenic, so err on the side of caution and wear gloves like I am. And it says for part A, what you're going to want to do is mix it thoroughly before you like weigh it and stir it. So if you get like a thick like popsicle craft stick, you can just use that and throw it out when you're done and just stir the solution. And then it says for the part B, you're supposed to shake it. So we'll do that when it comes time to mix it. And it's like a thick consistency. There's like a layer of like sediment on the bottom that you're going to want to get through when you stir it, and just try to get it to an even consistency before you pour it into the cup. And I think that should be okay. So I'm just going to pour some of this out into this little cup. That should be roughly enough to get the job done. Now you're going to want to weigh that on the scale. I think right now it's set to mass. It's measuring at 35.8. So you're going to want to get 1/10 of that for the part B. We'll shake that. So 35.8 divide that. So you're going to want about 3.58. 3.6. There we go. Okay. So now I'm going to pour that into this. And then mix that. And then I'll have to pour it into the basin to make the mold. So once you have your mold stuff mixed and you have your figure set up, you can start the molding process. And what you're going to want to do is just pour it really slowly into the cup. And you're going to want to keep the stream of mold liquid as thin as possible, so you know that there's no air bubbles getting into your mold that could disrupt the final piece when you run it in resin. And you're just going to want to keep doing this. It's going to take forever and it's going to suck, but you got to do what you got to do so you don't get any air bubbles in your final piece. And then once you have the mold completed, you're going to want to let it sit for about 4 hours while the mold cures, and then you'll be able to take it out and run it in resin. So after letting the mold sit overnight, I was able to remove his arm from the mold, and now we have a silicone little block here, and you have a negative impression of the arm. And what we're going to do is we're going to take resin, an Alumilite resin, and we're going to fill the mold and let it cure. And then once it cures, you can pull out a perfect replica of the piece you're trying to cast. So what I'm going to be using to cast this is Alumilite resin, and this stuff is a 1-to-1 ratio by measurement, not by weight like the other one. You just measure the milliliters, and it cures in 7 minutes, so you kind of have to work quick. What you have to do is measure out equal parts in each cup and then quickly pour it into the other cup, and you need to stir it really quickly with like a chopstick is fine. And do wear gloves because the chemicals are really volatile. Like the smell of this one alone will deter you from wanting to touch it with your bare hands. So you're just going to want to shake them thoroughly before you start. So I'll do that now with the part A, and I'll just pour out what I'll need. And I'll stop that at about halfway to the 5 mark on this measuring cup. I'll go to 5. And you're going to shake your part B, and you're just going to measure out an equal amount in the other cup. So I'm going to want about 5 mLs, and that looks to be about even. So what I'm going to do next is take our little handy dandy chopstick here. And I think this one pours better, so I'm going to pour it into the part A, and I'm going to mix this very quickly. It's going to get hot. That's something that's important to know. It gets hot, so you're not going to want to touch it because it might burn. So just don't touch it with your bare fingers. Wear gloves and all will be well. Yeah, even now I can feel it. It's getting warm in the cup. And what you're going to want to do when you pour it into the mold, and the mold should be soft. The softer the mold, the easier it's going to be to get it out. This is like a new mold, so it's kind of squishy. But if it's an older mold, you'll want to like microwave it for a little bit before you use it, and it'll just get the squishiness a little. It'll make it softer and easier to remove the piece from. So you're just going to want to pour in a little bit of resin. You're not going to want to fill it, just enough to like swish around inside the mold and like coat the walls so you don't get any bubbles and like the visible sculpt. You can get like a little pokey tool and like move the resin around, make sure it gets into all the crevices and eliminate as many air bubbles as you can. And just feel around in there like there's fingers on this. So I'm going to try to get all those fingers to come in nicely, capture all the detail. Again, going with your pokey. Every time you pour in more resin, you're going to want to poke around and make sure you get all the air bubbles out, because air bubbles are the enemy. They're going to weaken your cast, and also you run the risk of just having a mold or a cast you can't use because there's a bubble in it that like ruins the appearance. So get like this is just like a old dental tool, and you can just dig around in there and make sure. Oh, see, look, it's already starting to set. Can I make it? Probably not. Yep. And that's done already. It goes quick. Yeah, look at that already. And you're probably just going to want to let that sit in the mold for like a good 10 minutes. This sets in 7, but 10 should, just to make sure it's like all dry. And so yeah, in 10 minutes I'll take this out and hopefully it'll work and I can put it onto our Gregor body and it'll all look all good. So I let the resin dry for about 10 minutes now. I think it's ready to be taken out. It when you tap it, it makes a hard noise and it doesn't dent. It's not squishy or plasticky. So let's see if we can take it out of the mold. What you're gonna want to do is like find the bottom of the mold and kind of like separate it and like kind of squeeze the piece out if you can. If you have to, you can just grab it and pull it out of the mold. I think those fingers are really in there. Okay, there we go. So this is a perfectly casted arm. I don't see any bubbles in there. I think all in all, it was a successful cast. And now what I'm going to do is replace this gauntlet with this new one that we just made, by the way, which we made without having to damage this figure, which is pretty great. So once you have all your parts put together, like all your parts ready, you're going to want to prep them, and you can do that with a Dremel. And it's a power tool. It's got like a rotor right here. You can put, it's got interchangeable attachments. For this figure, we're going to be using a nylon brush. And what this does is it like sands through the plastic really nicely. You can almost like negative sculpt with it. And what's nice about it is it's not too dangerous. Like if it's spinning really fast and it scuffs your finger, you're not going to feel too much. And you just got to tighten it like this. What I would recommend, if you're going to get yourself a Dremel, get one that has a cord, because the ones with the batteries, you have to recharge. And the worst thing is if you're in the middle of working, you're in the flow, and then your Dremel runs out of battery and you got to wait for it to charge. So do yourself a favor and get yourself a Dremel that has a cord that you can plug into the wall and just use however long you need to use it until you're done. You've got your proper attachment in and your figure's ready to be Dremeled, you're going to want to get some eye protection, because when you're using this, sometimes hot plastic can shoot up and like get you in the eye, and it really sucks because it hurts, and you could really just mess up your eyes. And as an artist, you're going to need your eyes. So do yourself a favor. Wear goggles, be safe. And if you're a child or a kid and you're young, you're watching this and you wanted to do this, I would really recommend you have a parent help you with this or watch you do it. Do not do this on your own unless you really, really know how to use this tool. Just please be safe, be cautious, have a parent there, and wear goggles, don't hurt yourself. You can see in the picture, he's got a shirt on. Rex has armor. So step one, we're going to sand away the armor, and there's just like a little power dial. It goes from 0 to 10. And I like to work, if you're like doing sanding with like a soft plastic like this, probably like a 6 or an 8 will do the trick. If it's too slow, it's not going to do anything. And if it's too fast, you're probably not going to have like good control over it. So like a 6 to 8 on the power. And it is going to be loud. Just be ready for that. Yeah, I could just jump right in and start sanding. An important thing to note while you're working is that you never want to force the Dremel into the figure. You want to glide over the surface, because if you dig too deep, you're gonna have to go back later and sculpt it in. So don't take away too much, and work in like almost little like negative layers. Like you take away a little bit at a time until it looks the way you need it to look. And yeah, if you take away too much, you're gonna have to add it in. Not fun. It adds a whole lot more time because you have to sculpt it and then you have to wait for it to dry. So only take away what you need to take away, and as you go, do your best to try and keep the surface smooth, because if it's uneven, the Dremel won't move over it as nicely as you would want it to. I get that it might appear a bit alarming that he has a giant hole in his chest and in his back, but what I had to do to prepare him for the sculpting phase was to remove all of the mass, like all of the stuff that was there, to make room for the sculpting phase. And, you know, this torso is hollow, which I did not expect. But, you know, you still have to take away what you have to take away. And once we fill this, we're going to be patching this with Aves, with Aves Fix It Sculpt in the sculpting phase. So don't worry about that so much. The face, having to get rid of all of Rex's facial hair was a bit of a challenge. And instead of using the nylon brush, which was good for, you know, shaving away the shoulder pads and the chest armor, it was better to use a green smoothing stone to like really do some of the fine detail sanding on his face. And as you can see, I had to change his jaw structure, and his upper lip was completely obscured, so I had to bring that out of the sculpt. And I think I did go in there with like a razor blade to redefine the lip. And that's pretty much what you're going to be doing in your sanding phase and preparing this figure for the sculpting phase. Alrighty, so what's happening now is the sculpting phase, and what I'm using is some Aves Fix It Sculpt, and it's kind of like it's like a light gray sort of doughy sculpting medium, and when it dries, it's kind of like a soft stone. It's really good for sanding, it's really good for smoothing out a surface. And right now, because, you know, he had that giant hole in his front and his back, what we're doing is we're filling it with Aves, and then you're going to want to use, I like to use a wooden sculpting tool because it retains the water. And when you use water on this stuff, it softens it. Like, it cuts through Aves. Like, a wet sculpting tool will cut through Aves Fix It like butter. It's wonderful. So what you want to do is just dip it in the water a little bit and then just get a little bit of the excess off. And then just smooth the surface. Smooth out all of the edges into the rest of the body, because the more you smooth while the sculpting material is wet, the less you're going to have to do later once it dries. Some people like to sand. I like to just get it all smoothed before I even get to that point. So I'm just going to make sure this is all looking nice, and the edges all blend into the form nicely. I'm just going to push some of the excess over here and try to form the open neck of the shirt. And one of the keys to like sculpting nicely is to sculpt in layers. If you go a little bit at a time and like think of your sculpt in layers, almost like you have like your base layer, then you have your primary forms, and then like your primary forms are rougher and more just to like set like a base, and then you have your secondary forms, which are a little more detailed, and you want to do that in your second sculpting run. And then in your third sculpting run, you're doing like tertiary, like super detailed forms. And if you think of your sculpt that way, you're going to have something that looks a lot more like well thought out, and it's going to look a lot cleaner, because instead of doing it all at once where you could like bump something or mess it up, you did it in layers and you did it as like a step process. And that's something a lot of sculptors tend to forget. Some don't, some do. So I figured I'd just put it out there. Sculpt in layers with primary, secondary, and tertiary form. And now that the front has been established, now I could move on to the back and smooth all of that out. So I'm just going to get my tool wet and blend it by just like using the blade, like the sharp end of the tool, to push the material around, and then use like the side of the tool that's wet to blend and smooth. So now that I have all the primary forms set and smoothed out, I'm going to start with the secondary forms. So in the reference picture over here, you can see that he's got more of a built-out chest, so I'm going to do that now. I have a little bit of Aves in my hands that I can work with. So this is what I have right here, and what I like to do for the sake of like symmetry is take how much mass I think I would need. So hopefully this should be enough. And then what I'm going to do is just roll that up into a nice ball, and then I'm going to cut it in half. So that means that the amount of mass that I would have on one side of the sculpt is completely replicated on the other, because they have the same amount of mass. So I'm going to just put this down and find the halfway point and just cut it. So now I have two pieces of equal mass that I can apply to the figure. And I'm going to apply the first one right here. And I'm going to try my best to follow the pectoral anatomy here and make sure that the forms that are on the figure make sense and they're like plausible human anatomy. Like you could look at it and say, yeah, a human body could create a shape that looks generally like that. And once you have the forms put on, you're just going to blend into the sculpt. And this is when primary and secondary forms are going to come together to make the final sculpt. I think his chest sculpt is simple enough where I might not need tertiary, like high detailed forms. It might just be primary and secondary. But nevertheless, you still want to make sure it's all perfectly smoothed, because, you know, you just don't want to leave things up to chance. Make sure every tool does everything that it can until you're done using it. And I'm going to try to blend the pectoral forms up in this direction, because with the flow of human anatomy, it kind of flows up and outward. So with the pectorals, you're going to see that they are going to blend this way, and then you're going to do minimal blending on the line below them. And then you're just going to want to press this line in, just so the two bits fuse, so the Aves fuses with the surface below it, but you don't want to blend it too much, or you're gonna risk the bottom completely copying the top. So you want to apply the correct amount of blending and the correct angle at which you press in on the sculpting material with your tool, so it all looks correct in the end. Right now the forms are a little strong. I could probably sand that later, but I'll try to do what I can now while the sculpting material is still wet, because you can't sand this until it dries. So I'm going to try to do as much as I can in this phase of the process. And that is more or less what I'm going to try to get the other one to look like. I might blend it a little bit more up here, but that's the basic idea of what it's going to end up looking like. So the next step in the process is what we call the boil and pop. So what you do is, if you need the parts of a figure, in this case I'll be needing her arms. Right now they don't come out because the plastic is hard, it's inflexible, but if you boil a figure for a few minutes, the plastic starts to soften and you can easily pop apart figures at their joints. So that's what I prepared this water for now. So you're just going to toss the figure in like that, and then all you have to do is wait for a little bit. Okay, so here she is. Just gonna get this oven mitt, and there you go. One arm popped out already. There's the other. It's that quick. It's that easy. It's great. You just gotta turn your oven off, and that's all you gotta do. Alright, so what we're going to be doing next is boring out the inside of this arm, because as you can see, there's a little bit of old figure left in here. We're going to need to hollow out this armor so that way it can fit into the elbow joint, which we're going to create a little bit later when I cut off these gauntlets. So right now I'm going to be using like a green sanding stone for the Dremel. It's like a small cylindrical stone, and I'm just going to gently grind away the inside of the elbow joint. And as you can see, when I'm using the Dremel, I don't want to apply too much pressure or I could lose control. So you just want to gently glide over the surface. So now you can see that it's all hollow on the inside there, and what I'm going to do next is get a different Dremel attachment and try to bore out kind of like a half sphere, but like negative down in there, and then I'm going to drill in so it fits onto an elbow joint and gives it articulation where there never used to be. So now that his sculpt is done on the torso, I started to get the other arm in place, and I did that by sinking the socket here and taking the shoulder joint from the Yarna and essentially like sanding a peg that I used to glue into this piece, and I also had to bore out the inside of that so I could glue it. And then I took a drill bit like this and I drilled into there so the peg would fit into the hole. And I'm about to do it on this arm so you guys can see how I did it. So I've got my Dremel here, and I'm using this rounded stone sander to sink the socket, and I'll do that now so you can see how that's going to work. So as you can see, it drills down and makes kind of like a negative, like kind of crater shaped impression, and that's where the rounded part of this joint is going to sit. So what you need to do is switch out the attachment on the Dremel. So you just got to press the lock button like that, screw it, and I think I'll need a smaller one of these, so I'm going to switch it out for this one so it'll fit the drill bit, and pop that in place. Again, you're going to want to press the lock button while you tighten it, and that feels good. So now we're going to drill into the arm. And hopefully, after doing that, this should fit nicely. And there you have it. So after I finished getting this arm into place, my dad helped me out, and he just put some sculpting material right here, and he filled in the holster spots. So now that that's done, he's pretty much ready for paint. I'll show you how I did the wrist on this. So I took the Rex hand from this one, and I just cut it. I just cut it right off of the Gauntlet. And then what I did was I took the wrist peg from the Yarnadel Gargan hand right here, and I drilled into the hand a little bit and then glued the peg into place. And by drilling it in, it gives this peg integrity. So if I were to glue the peg directly onto the hand and then pop it in, the hand could just snap right off the peg. And then you have the peg lodged inside of the arm and you can't get it out, and that sucks. So by drilling into the hand and putting the peg in there, and you can just stick it in there with some normal Loctite super glue. You don't need anything special. You just use super glue, and then you drill into the wrist with a drill bit that matches the size of the peg, and then you have a perfectly articulating wrist for your action figure. Now that the figure has been fully sculpted, built, sanded, and prepared, it's time for the painting phase. And what you're going to want to do for the first part of the painting phase is do your color picking. I already did my color picking, but I'll explain to you how I did it. So you want to get your picture of reference out so you know what colors are going to be going where, so you know what colors you're getting out and what you're looking for. So for the skin tone, that's usually one of the most complex parts of the paint job. You're going to want several colors for the skin tone. And he's got like darker, more tan skin. So I have my darkest color, which is this dwarven flesh. It's like a dark red kind of skin tone. And then I have the desert tan. It's another dark skin tone. I'll probably be mixing these two together to make a base tone. And then you're going to have your middle tones, which are the suntan flesh and tan skin. Other dark colors, but they aren't as dark as the dwarven flesh and desert tan. And then you have your highlight color, which is the elf flesh. And you're not going to be using much of this because it's only going to be on like the highest points of the face. And it's going to be there to give it more dimension. And then you have the shirt. That's a little more simple. It's just gray. So I got out these colors right here. We have like a darker concrete gray, and then a lighter kind of bluish gray, and then maybe a darker gray if I'm going to need it. And that should be enough for like the base tone of the shirt. For the pants, you can see they're kind of like a brown, but it's like a little ashy. So I got the ashen brown and Formula P3 Beast Hide, and I'll be mixing those together to make the color for the pants. The knee pads are kind of like a beige bone color, so I got the Ushabti bone colored paint. I think this one's a Citadel, and for the Gauntlet, you know, standard clone armor is white, and then he's got his yellow color accents from his Clone Wars armor. So I have black for the base color of the armor, and then you're going to dry brush over it with white. And then I have this yellow right here for the painting designs on the armor gauntlet. So I'll get into how you paint your base coats and how to layer your paint so it has more dimension, and then dry brushing, maybe some stuff about highlights, and I'll show you all the ins and outs of how to do a complete paint job. What I'm going to start with is the base of the skin tone, and that is what I'm going to be using on the arms and maybe the neck. I'm going to see how it looks on the arms, and if it looks a little different, I'll match it to the neck too. So I took my two darkest colors that I showed you before, the Dwarven Flesh and the Suntan Flesh. I'm just going to shake these up. And then right here on my paint palette, I'm just going to put a little bit of that. And then a little bit of that. And then you just get a nice little fine-tipped paintbrush. I like to dip it in water, keep the brush hydrated. If it dries out, the bristles of the brush tend to fray a bit, and it doesn't really have that same accuracy when you're painting on a surface that, you know, you need to have an accurate paint job with. So you're just going to mix your two base tones together. It's really important to use a lot of colors when you make your skin tone so it doesn't appear flat once you put it on the figure. So let's see. Leap of Faith, first paint stroke. And there you go. That's the base color there you're seeing. And it looks a little dark, but that's exactly what a base coat is supposed to look like. If your base color is the same as the finished color, then it's going to look really weird when you finish it, because you need to have your base color be the darkest, because it's what you would be seeing in the shadows. This paint in a lot of the areas is going to end up being covered, but it provides an undertone which reflects through some of the other paints that will make it appear more natural in the end. I just want to make sure I get in here. Don't want to miss any spots. And then just move on to the forearm. Try to cover as much surface area as I can with this paint while it's still wet, because acrylic paint does dry fairly quickly. You want to make sure when you're applying your paint that you're not putting too much paint onto the surface, because if you put too much paint in your base coat, it's going to obscure the structure of the sculpt under it, and it's going to look really weird. Sometimes you're going to get like weird grainy textures in the paint if you put it on too thick. So work in thin coats. This is a higher density pigment paint, so you're probably not going to need that many coats to do the job, which is certainly helpful. The lower the density of the pigment, the more paint you're going to need to cover the surface and to have it be like even toned. And if you have to put too much paint onto a surface, it'll get clumpy, it'll look weird. So high density pigment paint is where it's at. And if your paint dries out a little bit, you can usually revive it with just a drop of water. Good as new. And there, that's even coat. So once it's all even, you can just start moving into the middle tone, which you're probably going to have to mix and do in steps, which I will lay out for you. So now that the base coat is done, I'm moving on and doing the middle coat. So I'm doing that with these two like middle tans, and that's going to be the desert tan and the tan skin. So right here I've got the tan skin already poured out of the bottle, and then I'll be taking the desert tan and just mixing a little bit of that in. And because that's a lighter color than this, it'll tie it all together, make it a little brighter. I might need a little more of the darker tan in there. See, that's something that's important. If you make a mix of colors and you're not happy with it, just keep changing the mixture until you're happy with it. Don't stop because you feel like it should have been right. Just do what feels right, you know? And this, okay, this looks better. And then gently glide my paintbrush over so as not to completely cover the base tone and allow it to shine through just a little. Gives it a lot more dimension. And dimension is always your friend. And notice that like with my paint strokes, that the areas I'm painting the lighter color onto are the areas that are most raised. So areas like the shoulder muscle and the bicep muscle and the tricep muscle that are most raised are the areas I'm putting the lighter paint on. And the areas like in between those muscles, like in these crevices, I'm not putting as much. And that's going to aid in the illusion of there being dimension in the muscle mass, even if there's not a whole lot. But I think there's a lot of dimension here. Gregor, he's got some pretty built arms, so there's not going to have to be a whole lot of illusion going on. But still, in my paint job, I don't want to just let the form do the work. I have to communicate the fact that there are raised areas and more recessed areas in my paint job just as much as my sculpt. Right there, this is the elbow bone right here, so that's probably something you could highlight a little bit. Because you're using this to kind of bring out the shaded areas and the lit areas on the inside of the arm, in here where there's not going to be a whole lot of light, you can be a little more sparing with your paint. And already it matches the neck a lot better. So as you can see, the base tone, while it doesn't always look like it makes sense, when it shines through the middle tone, it makes it really pop. It makes it feel more alive. So I would say that upper arm right there is about done. So I'm going to move on to the lower forearm now and just brush that on really gently. And just a little note on something that tends to get ignored. When you paint, you want to follow the flow of the bones and muscles of the structure. So the striations in a muscle, specifically in an arm like this one, the striations would go downward like this. In the shoulder, they would arch around and go down. And in the bicep, they would probably curve a little inward. And as you paint, you want to follow that striation. You want to make sure you follow like the biological pattern of the muscles, because if the paint and the lighting that you're creating, you're pretty much creating the lighting with the paint. So if the lighting looks like it's following objects that are within the flow of anatomy, it'll make more sense. You can see with this arm, I'm kind of swirling around towards the thumb, because in the forearm, all the muscles kind of follow this flow towards your thumb. So when you paint with your paintbrush, you want to follow that flow towards the thumb. Kind of spiral it all inward. And I would call that forearm just about done. I will finish up the other one off screen so you don't have to watch all of that. And I will come back with 2 fully painted arms. So now that I have the base and middle tones completed, I'm gonna start with the highlights. And you know, his middle tones and his original skin tones here are starting to get a little closer, but you can see the arms are a little darker. So with the highlights, it's hopefully gonna tie it all in. So I have my lightest color here, it's Elf Flesh. I'm gonna use it sparingly. If I use too much, the arms are gonna get too light. So this is where it's time to be real careful about how you apply your paint. So I'm gonna put a little dash of this on my palette. You're not gonna need much, especially since it's just a highlight. And I mean, it looks a little light, so I might err on the side of caution and just put a little bit of this dark color in there. Not enough to make a drastic change, just so it doesn't look too bright. Just wipe off some of that excess on the paper towel here. And here I'm going to apply just a little bit. I might throw a little bit of water into it so it doesn't go on too thick. And that is looking a little too bright. I don't know, I wiped some of it off with my finger and I think it helped. But yeah, you don't want it to be too bright, because then it still won't match. Alright, so there's some of the highlights on the arm. I might go in a little bit back here and just darken it up again. That's fine, you know, if you need to make touch-ups after the fact, that's okay. Just as long as you follow the structure of the body and put shadowing in the places where it makes sense, it'll be cool to look at. So after going back in and touching it up, I think it matches a lot better. Now that I have the skin tone painted, we can move on to putting the base coat down for the shirt and the pants and the gauntlet. So I have the picture open here and I've got my colors picked out. I think for the shirt, the best colors to go for would be these kinds of like bluish grays. So you're going to have your darkest color, your lightest color, and your medium color that you can mix into if you need to. And for the pants, I have these 2 colors, my dark and a light, because I'm probably not going to get too complicated. This is going to be part of a set. It's going to be Gregor, Rex, and Wolf. And Rex and Wolf aren't too detailed in their paint job, so I don't want him to stand out too much. If I put too much into this paint job, he's going to stand out like a sore thumb. So I want to make sure they all fit together when they're in a photo together. So no overly complex paint jobs here. And then for the gauntlet, I have my base color, my highlight, and then he's got some yellow stripes on it, so I got a nice yellow color to paint that in with. So I'll start with putting an even tone of a base color on the shirt. Alrighty, so you're just gonna get a little bit of that on your brush. And just start applying it to the figure. You see, what I like to do when I paint is go around the edge of what I'm painting. So as you can see, he has like the edge of the shirt there. So I'm going to take my brush and just very, very carefully paint around that edge. Very careful not to get any of the paint out of where it's supposed to be. Because you got to be careful with the edges. Once you have the edges done, you can like go crazy in like the center, like in here, this zone. You don't really have to be as careful because there's no edges there. So around the edges, like the shoulder straps, you're going to want to be a little more careful in your application. It's okay to wet your paintbrush if it feels a little dry, because we're not dry brushing right now. If you're dry brushing, then sure, let your paintbrush get dry, but that is not what we're doing, so we don't want it to get dry. Also, if you dry brush with a detail brush like this, it can be bad for the brush, so make sure you're using the right brush for the right job. So you can see I have it almost completely evened out on the front, but we still have to do the back. So that'll be what I do next. And once I finish the base coat, I'll get into the layering. And that'll mean adding some highlights, just some basic highlights, and then we can move on into the gauntlet and the pants. So now that I have the base coat done on the shirt, I can start to do some of the highlights. So I brought my 2 highlight colors, and I'm going to get right into mixing. So you're going to shake up your paints and start mixing. I have my highlight color, and that's going to be the brightest color on the surface, and that's going to go in the peaks, the highest areas, and then your shading is going to be in your lowest areas. So maybe along here you can see there's like this shadow. You don't want to paint your highlight in there. You want to paint your highlight on the shiny spots, like up here and up here and along here. And I'll show you how to apply those in a way that visually makes sense. You're going to want to highlight over the shoulders, considering if you're imagining your light source from coming above, you're going to want your lightest color to probably be over the shoulder strap and on the top of the chest, pectorals, and then on top of the abdominal muscles. You can almost have like variation in highlight. Like in here, I did use my highlight paint all across the chest, but in the raised areas, I put a few more layers, so you get like kind of a fade between like different kind of levels of light to give it some more dimension. Because the more contrast, the darker your darks and the brighter your brights, it's really going to make your paint job stand out. And there you go. After just a few minutes of painting, you've got some decent highlights. So now that I have the shirt done, I'm going to move on to the pants. And once I have the pants, the gauntlet, and the shirt done, I'm going to move into the detail work. And that's going to be finalizing the face and then putting his little like burger and fries icon on his shirt. So for the pants, which is what I'm going to start with, I'm going to use my dark brown right here called Ashen Brown and my lighter brown called Beast Hide. So I'm just going to shake these up and I'm going to get to mixing. And just like that, you have a good base coat on the pants. So now that I have the base coat done on the pants and on the knee pads, I'm going to work on the gauntlet. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to start with a base color, kind of like a dark gray. This one's called Armor Gray. And then I'm going to dry brush some white over it, so the little lines in here are going to hold the shadow of this darker gray, and the white is going to pop, and it's going to look really cool. So what you do is you start by taking your gray and shake up your paint. I'm just going to put it on my palette here. So I'm just going to be real careful around these edges to not get the paint on the skin. Make sure it gets all in all the cracks and crevices, so when the white paint goes on, it's the dark paint that shows in there. As you can see, I'm taking the paint and trying to spread it out because I don't want it to all clump up, because that's really bad. All right, great. That's completely covered. Now I'm gonna get the hand plate here. And this technique that I'm doing, where I'm priming the figure in a darker color and then dry brushing a white over it, that's something I do with all of my clones. It really helps with making the armor look weathered and stand out. If you're trying to make a clone that looks really shiny and new, then maybe you don't want to do that. But in this case, Gregor's really old now because he's got that growth acceleration and all that, and his armor's pretty aged, like himself. So you want to make sure you really do weather it. So the best thing I can really do now is just wait for this to dry. And once it does, I'll dry brush this white over it. So now that I have my base paint color applied and now it's dry, I'm going to start the dry brushing process. And one thing you're going to need to know for the dry brushing process, you're going to want a brush that's good for dry brushing. Notice that this brush is messy. It's probably seen better days. So when you use a brush for dry brushing, you're going to want to use one of your older, more messed up ones as opposed to your new, crisp, sharp pointed brushes. So for that, you're going to need a paper towel, a paint palette, maybe, and you're not going to want to use water because that would defeat the purpose of it being called dry brushing. If you're going to be using water, you should be using it for base coats, not for your dry brushed highlights. That little drop of paint right there should do the trick. What you're going to want to do without dipping your brush in the water, the water's a no-no, is take a little bit right there and then wipe off the excess on paper towel, like so. And then on the figure, you're going to want to just gently dance the brush across the surface. And as you can see, what that's already doing is creating some pretty serious contrast between the areas that are raised and the ones that are sunken in. Gives it a lot of depth. What you're going to notice is the paint kind of has like a powdery appearing consistency. And that's good. That's exactly what you want. That means you're doing it right. If your paint is streaky and it's falling into the cracks, then that means your brush is too wet or you need to wipe off your excess paint. And when you have cracks that go sideways like this, you're going to want to go against them so the paint doesn't get in the crack. So along this line, I'm just going to brush the paint up. Now we have a gauntlet that looks weathered, and all we had to do was paint it black and then dry brush the white over. So now I'm going to do that on the little hand plate here. I might go in here and there with my wet brush paint. All right, that's looking pretty crispy. Get that hand back in the peg. Now that I've got the gauntlet completely painted with its base colors, I'm going to go in and do the detail painting, which is the yellow lines on his gauntlet and the black wash shading thing he has going on the outside of his gauntlet. Looks kind of like a burn. But before we do the burn, we have to do our detail painting. So we're gonna need to get our brush really sharp. So dip it in water and sculpt the brush tip with your fingers. And here I've got my Averlin Sunset. It's a Citadel paint. Just shook it up, and now we're gonna start painting the Gauntlet design with it. And now I'm looking at, I have my picture up over here. I'm gonna have it up for myself at all times. I'm looking at it. The yellow line starts at the top of this edge, so I'm going to make a mark right here that I can follow. And now I know that my yellow line is going to start at the end of this little block. And what I'm going to do now is paint that diagonal line that goes all the way around. And at this seam right here, this is the farthest point from this little rib right here. So this is where the two diagonal lines are going to converge. This is going to be the lowest point. I might go back in and fill this in because it looks like it has a bit of a gradient. I don't want that. I think I need a little more paint, which is fine. I'm just going to get that on my brush. And I'm just trying to make sure I get everything covered. Every surface is accounted for. Oh, it looks like I got a little bit right here. I'm sure you can see it that goes past the line. See, what you can do to fix that is tip your brush in some water and use the wet brush to kind of like wipe away some of that excess paint. Then you can go in, get some more paint, and redefine that line after you fix it. Because sometimes you wipe away some of the paint you want there too. All right, that's looking kind of good. So I'm going to move on and do the wrist plate. I'm looking at that in the picture, and it seems the wrist plate is just completely yellow, so that's not going to be too difficult. I'm just going to get some more paint on this brush. Just paint it a solid yellow, and that'll be it. And it really is as simple as that. You just do it. Now for the tricky part. There's going to be a thin line that goes above this one with a white line in between. That's going to require some more detailed work. So I'm going to bring this nice and close to the camera. And I'm going to do it all up close and personal. So you can see how meticulous this is going to be. And notice how the paint that I'm using is very watery, because it's easier to work with this way. I can do this really thin, fine detail, scary stuff. And believe me when I say this is indeed the scary part. You know, I definitely don't want to be slipping up right now. And if I do, well, let's not even think about that. Let's just not. No mistakes. I'm just going to go over this line one more time, make sure it, oops. I'm going to make sure it all looks well and good. Aside from it being a little thick right here, I think I'll be all right. So I'm going to get some white paint and I'm going to fix that up for you guys so you can see it. And now I'm going to go in and fix this line right here. works, and now he's got his painted gauntlet. And what I'm gonna do next is weather it. On his gauntlet in the show, there's like a big black burn right here, most likely from the explosion he was in the Clone Wars. I don't know, that's just a theory. But I'm probably gonna get like a wash, kind of like a watery black paint, and paint in that burn, and I'll show you guys how to do that. So now that I have the gauntlet paint job done, I'm gonna put that wash kind of burn mark on it. So what I'm using, well, what I'm going to use is this solid black paint just watered down. But what's best to find is a wash. This one's all dried up. It doesn't have any more, so that's why I'm gonna have to make my own with this. But if you're shopping for materials on your own, I would recommend you get a Citadel wash to actually use, because there's something about using the real washes. There's like a transparency to the paint that you're not going to find by just making your own wash at home. So you're just going to take a little bit of paint. You don't need much because you're going to be watering it down a lot. You're going to take some water on your brush and just drop it into the dish. And you stir it until it has like a watery, sort of transparent appearance. And let's just test it out. So when you paint it, it looks kind of watery. This is what we're looking for. So just get the excess off your brush. And now I'm just going to start stippling that on. Right. So I think after some serious weathering, that did the trick. It looks pretty burnt. And now I can move on to some of the finer details, including working on the face and working on the cheeseburger icon he has on his shirt. So now that the gauntlet is done and the face has been prepped, I'm going to start painting on the facial hair. And what I'm going to use is some of the gray that I had from earlier, the concrete gray. And I'm going to use some of the white that I used earlier, just the pure white. So I have them over here on my palette, and I'm just going to mix them together a little bit. So here it goes. Mix it together until it's all even in consistency and color. And then I just want to clean my brush off a little bit because this is going to be some real fine detail stuff. Because his facial hair is kind of a bit of a shadow, I don't want the paint to be too thick, so I'm going to put a little bit of water in it to thin it out. So I'm looking at the picture here, and I can see that he has facial hair all along here, so I'm going to start at the jaw. And just try to connect those lines and avoid that little empty spot between under the nose and above the lips. And just try to leave that little spot open. And in the picture, I can see that he has some white in his facial hair. So it kind of goes between the gray and the white. He's kind of got like some salt and pepper going on. So I'm just going to shake up that white. Squeeze out a little bit on my palette. So he's got a little bit of white right here. I'm going to stipple that in. And he's got a little bit on the other side. So just like the other side, I'm just going to stipple that in real careful. Then he's got some white on his chin I'm going to stipple that in real carefully on both sides. And then after I stipple in the white, I'm going to go in with a darker gray and stipple that in so it looks kind of like it's got that salt and pepper I was talking about. And then I know his facial hair looks a little strong right now. I might go over it with a thin coat of his skin color to really subdue it and make it seem like it's not all the way grown in, like it's just a 5 o'clock shadow. So I'm going to take some darker gray here, and then again just blot it, and that gives the illusion that the facial hair is like almost under the skin, which it kind of is. When you shave, there's little hairs that kind of like stay under your skin a little bit, and that's what you're trying to create with your paint illusion. A lot of painting is creating an illusion, making the person who's looking at it think something is there or looks a certain way that actually isn't. A Gregor with complete facial hair that looks the way you would want it to look. So what I'm going to be doing next is making the cheeseburger and wrapper emblem on his chest. And that's going to require some really fine detail painting, which isn't easy. So what I like to do first before I do anything like that is to draw an outline. So I have my reference picture up to my left, and I'm just going to take a pencil, draw an outline, and then paint everything within that outline. It just gives me a good guide while I work. So I'm going to start with the top of the burger bun right here. So we kind of have a rough sketch of a burger going on here. And then there's like the 3 triangle shaped things that come out up here. I don't know if they're supposed to be fries or a wrapper or whatever, but they're gonna start at about this point I'm seeing in the picture, and it goes to about this far. So I'm gonna draw that line out. And this third one looks like it might be a bit of a challenge. So we have the top line, and then it looks like it comes in 2 times. And out for the final line. So I believe this is how it should all look. Obviously that's going to be filled in with color next, but that's a good starting point to help you gauge how things are supposed to look. So up next, I'm going to start painting. So I have now just picked out the colors for the burger and fries, I guess, icon on his shirt. And looking at the picture, you can see that the bun is kind of like a dark orange color, so that's why I'm using this sunburned flesh. It's kind of like a soft orangey brown kind of color. And then the center of the burger is like a yellow, so I'm using pale saffron. And then the fries, they kind of have a color gradient, so they start with like a salmony kind of pink and they end in a bright yellow, and then in between each one is a richer kind of yellow that's the same yellow in the burger patty. So that's going to be the pale saffron. That's what's going to go in between the burger buns and in between the fries, I'll call them, even though I don't really know what they are. So I guess we'll start with the burger. We'll take this kind of patty color. I'll shake it up and I'll just put it on the palette right here. Okay. Now, ideally, I wouldn't have a camera in my workspace. I'm used to like getting really close to my sculpts when I'm doing this kind of work. So if it's not perfect, I might go back once I'm off camera and just make sure all the forms look as crisp as they need to. I'm gonna try to do my best with the camera here. Alright, so I'm just going to very carefully paint in the bottom line there and then fill it in. And it's okay to leave a little bit of the pencil showing here because in the picture he's got a white outline outside of everything. So at the end I'm going to go in with white and paint the outline. And now it's time for the bottom bun. I think the top bun is looking good. Let's just get a dash of paint on the brush and paint that bottom bun. Okay, so there's the burger bun, and now I'm gonna crack open this pale saffron, give it a shake, and then oh, that was more paint than I was expecting. And just gonna dip my paintbrush in there. I'm going to very carefully apply the paint in between the burger buns. So right here, we're going to paint that pale saffron. And just be very careful because the wrinkle in the shirt here does make it a little more difficult to paint a straight line. So just turn the figure, look at it from a few angles, make sure it all looks okay. And I believe that should do it for the burger. Now we need to move on to the fry-like things. And I'm going to do that with a rosy pink to lemon yellow gradient. I might mix this maybe with this color to kind of make it that salmon-y pink color. Okay, perfect. This is exactly the color we're looking for. And I'm just going to paint that first line. Maybe about halfway, because it is a gradient. I need to get these colors to fade into each other. So I'll stop it at about there. And then on the second one, do the same thing. Alrighty. And now the third one, the one that's kind of a triangle shape, I'm just gonna dip back in the paint. And there we go. Now it branches out into those 3 lines. And yellow, I will admit, is a tricky color, so to get this gradient to work might take a little bit of time, because yellow paints best in a few coats. Alright, I'm gonna take the cap off of this and just tap out what I need onto the palette. And clean up my brush. And alright, let's attempt this gradient here. And that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to take a little more yellow, maybe a little more yellow. All right. And now for the triangle at the bottom. These are going to be even thinner, so I'm going to have to be even more careful. Alrighty. There's that. I'm going to make some more of this transition color. This like orange pink color. And then I'm going to paint it into that little triangle on the bottom. Okay. That makes more of a convincing gradient. And this works well because the saffron stands out against the lemon yellow, because the lemon yellow is like a really bright kind of almost white yellow, and the saffron is really rich. So right next to each other, they do stand out well. And what I'm going to do next is paint in that white outline, and I'll probably do that off camera. So once I'm back, I will have put in the white outlines. Maybe I'll do a few touch-ups here and there, and then he should be pretty much about done. Alrighty, so after going back in and making a few touch-ups, I added some lines here on the pants, and then I put on that white outline, and he is pretty much done. He's done. I took some dull coat testers like spray to seal it all, and that'll keep the paint from rubbing off. So, you know, I think when I was making him, I had some issues with paint coming off the pants. Once you seal it, that's not going to happen. And that's pretty much it. That is a completed Gregor custom action figure. So thank you everyone for watching, and may the force be with you.